late stragglers today. We had a couple of guest collaborators this month, which was a lot of fun for me. Everyone on the call probably knows who I am, but for those who maybe are watching the recording later that don't know, I'm Crystal Scott, and I'm the founder of the Accessibility Book Club. We've been going strong now. This is our third year running the Accessibility Book Club on LinkedIn, and it has been so much fun. We actually hit over 3,000 club members just this last month, so that was a really exciting milestone. And we are a community group of individuals who love accessibility, we love inclusion, we love tech. We're designers, we're developers, we're accessibility advocates, we're authors, and we're all come together for the sole purpose of trying to make the web more accessible for everyone. So today we're joined by Susi Miller, our wonderful author, and we're here to talk about designing accessible learning content, the second edition today. So Susi Miller, thank you so much for joining us today. If you'd like to give a brief intro, I'd love to introduce you to the audience.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, and thank you very much. I'm very, very honoured to be here. So yes, I suppose my introduction would be a background to my work and how the book came about. So I've basically been in learning and development for, oh goodness, about 35 years now, and so I've always been in some kind of form of teaching, and started off as a classroom teacher, did a lot of systems training, a lot of face-to-face training, and then moved into the digital side of things. And I did a lot of worked across different sectors, but mainly in the public sector in the UK and in the university sector. And I suppose it was really, we had a law change in 2018 based on the an EU directive that came into it was transposed into UK law, which meant that things needed to be accessible to the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. And that, I think, was the first time. I'd always been really interested in accessibility and passionate about it, and wanted to kind of, you always introduce it into the work as much as I could. But when we had this finally, it was a legal requirement, and I was working in the higher education sector at the time. It was really, oh my goodness, this is something that is a legal requirement. And that was where I kind of got the focus on understanding the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, because for the first time, although they'd underpinned the legislation in the UK before, it was the first time that they were really, a requirement that we were meeting these regulations. So absolutely terrified, tried to make sense of them. I was completely out of my depth. I just thought, goodness me, but I was also, in the role that I was doing some training for other people. So it was the site kind of, I have to understand this and I have to make sense of it myself before I can hope to explain it to other people. So it was the many hours I spent trying to make sense of the guidelines. Obviously, seeing as I was going along that they were really, impactful, and they had a really good effect, on my learning, which was fantastic. But it was trying to kind of, as I say, really not be so frightened and just run away from it completely. Try and make sense of it in the light of the fact that I'm creating not a website or a mobile app, I'm creating a piece of learning content. So I need it to be an effective piece of learning, as well as being as accessible as I can make it. So that was what started the kind of journey. I started my own business. I decided to really focus on accessibility. At the time, there was no jobs that I could really focus on accessibility. So I started my own company. And one of the things I think that you're sort of encouraged to do as an entrepreneur is to write a book that kind of puts you in there. So I thought, I'll self-publish, and then I was very lucky to get a publishing contract. So that kind of catapulted me into becoming an author, which I have to say was absolutely terrifying. But yes, one of the best things I've ever done. So sorry, that was probably quite a long introduction.
Thank you for helping us all get to know you a little better, Susi.
Okay.
Yeah, the whole point of us being here is to get to know you better and hear more about your book. So thank you so much for helping us understand how that came to be, and giving us a little bit of background. I don't have my regular book club managers with us today. Ricky and John could not make it, but they do send their regards. And I do have Osborne here as a guest collaborator, and I just wanted to thank him so much for jumping in this month and for posting his insights and thoughts in the club. I know he's prepared a key takeaway and some questions for Susie. And so Osborne, if you want to go ahead and jump right in there and get us started, I would love to hear your thoughts so far on the book, and any questions you have prepared for Susie. For anyone else in the audience, if you guys have questions as we're going for our author today, you can post those in the messages, or feel free to raise your hand and I'd be happy to call on you. I really want this to feel like a collaborative space where we're all having a conversation.
Great, thanks, Crystal. Thanks for the introduction as well. So to this, very, very briefly, a little bit about me. I've been working in the learning and development space now for about 10 plus years, primarily working out of Canada, where our laws in terms of accessibility are a little bit different than what's taking place in Europe and in the States. I work out of Ontario, where we follow the AODA guidelines in terms of our legislation. And I was really, really excited to actually get my hands on this book, because when we talk about accessibility and digital accessibility, a lot of it is primarily based on the web. You can find tons of it related to how to make the web an accessible place. But when we're talking about learning and development, that's where it gets a little bit tougher. And when you're looking at the guidelines for the WCAG guidelines and how you translate them over to learning and development, sometimes it's kind of hard to kind of find that translation. So Susie, you've done a wonderful job in kind of making sure that we have something available within the learning and development community. So quite appreciative of that. Thank you so much. So my first question, right from the beginning preface section, I love how you opened it up. You're taking us to Zimbabwe. Thank you for that. So I'm here picturing this beautiful classroom. And sorry if I mispronounce her name, because maybe you're going to have to correct me. But is it Farise?
We used to say Farisai, but yeah, absolutely, that's fine.
Say it one more time for me, so make sure I get it right. Farisai.
Yeah.
Okay, Farisai. Yeah. Okay, great. So she's sitting in the classroom and she has a vision impairment. And one of the things that you mentioned was back previously, they didn't have assistive technology for the classroom environment back then. So I'm curious, and then she had someone that was a principal reader that was sitting next to her, that was explaining to her what was taking place in the classroom, right?
Yeah.
So I'm curious to know, because a lot of my background in learning and development comes from the digital aspects of it and the e-learning aspects of that. So what type of assistive technology do we have now? Because you mentioned in that preface that now there's a lot more technology to help individuals in the classroom. Mm-hmm. What are some of those examples of what kind of technology do we have right now to help people in the classroom?
So I think in the classroom, if I go back to Farisai, her principal assistive technology now would probably be a screen reader. So she would have the opportunity to be using a screen reader that would be able to read the text for her. So in the story that I gave, she was a Braille user. So once we managed to get a copy, because I was teaching A-level English, it was literature that I was teaching. So once we were able to find a copy of that for her, she was able to access it. Whereas before, some of the other literature texts we were studying, we couldn't actually source the Braille for her. But yes, the equivalent now of and then people who are blind and have visual access needs, a lot of people still do use Braille as well. But then from a technology point of view, then a screen reader is the principal, way that someone would be able to read that text.
Okay, great. Yeah. So we have screen readers. Is there anything else in the classroom environment that we have right now for technology?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose if you're looking at the whole range of different types of access needs, you would have, you could have things like some of the things that I covered in the book. So screen magnification, so screen magnifiers, for example, that would be a good example. Again, some people with vision access needs, they have got some vision, and a screen magnifier can be really helpful. You have a lot of things for people with cognitive access needs now. So that is something that I would imagine many of us have probably got some experience of using some of those built-in tools that we have now in our everyday technology. So things that will read text aloud. I'm dyslexic, so I use that all the time to read to read text because it helps me to process it if I'm listening to it rather. And actually, that's something that I use a lot for when I was proofreading the book. It's very easy to miss things if you're reading, especially if you're dyslexic. So a lot of cognitive things. And again, from a hearing point of view, you have technology such as things like hearing loops. You have people who are using things like cochlear implants that mean that they can recognize sound as well. And then I think from a hearing point of view, you have things that again we're more familiar with, like captions, for example. That's a form of assistive technology for a lot of people.
Okay, excellent. Before I move on to my next question, is there any follow-up questions that we have from anybody in the group today based on accessibility and learning within the classroom environment? Any questions related to that?
I don't, Osborne.
No? Okay. No worries. I'll move on to my question number 2 for you here. And this goes to on page 20. I love this little segment.
Can I look, or are you going to tell me?
If you have your books with you, feel free to turn to page 20 because I love this segment. When I first read it, I was like, wow, okay, that's insightful. So I'm gonna take the liberty of,
okay.
I mean, like Susie, maybe you can even read it if you have your book.
No, you read it. No, that's fine.
No, am I gonna go for it? Okay,
Yeah.
so I'll read out this paragraph because I thought it was incredibly insightful. I have seen many examples of learning content accessible but still not inclusive. This is because learning content can pass all the requirements for the WCAG standards as based on my previous definition. But that does not necessarily mean that it provides a good learner example for people with disabilities and access needs, or makes them feel included. My definition of inclusive learning content is therefore learning which makes all learners feel welcomed, considered, and valued, and provides a good learning experience for everyone. I love it.
Yeah.
Like, good job.
Oh, thank you.
Good job.
Glad that resonated.
Yeah, that resonated with me. So I have like a two-folded question here for you.
Okay.
First of all, can you share some examples for us in terms of learning content that passed WCAG standards and guidelines, but didn't quite hit the mark in terms of making someone with accessibility needs feel welcomed or considered or valued?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I think the again, without wanting to go on for too long, I think I was so lucky when we were talking about, Crystal, you said this is the second edition of the book. So when I wrote the first edition of the book, I was focusing on the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines version 2.1. And then probably about 3 years later, I was very, very lucky that they changed to 2.2 because that gave me the opportunity to bring out the second edition. Now, the reason that was particularly lucky, as an author, that is, it's so wonderful to be able to go back and improve on your on the work that you've done maybe in a different edition. But for me as well, I had done so much work with different organizations, and one of the things that I do is a lot of auditing work, and it was the auditing work that really gave me that insight. So when I'd written the first edition, it was based on my interpretation and on my experience, but that was quite limited experience within 1 or 2 different organizations. Working as a consultant meant that I was really privileged to work with a lot of different organizations. And as I say, one of the things that I was asked to do was a lot of auditing work. Now, when I started the auditing work, obviously the first thing that you're doing as an audit is looking at it from a piece of, how accessible is this as a piece of learning content? Is it meeting the requirements? Because generally that's what you're auditing against. You're auditing most normally against the WCAG A and AA standards, and that, depending on what version, it could be the 2.2 or the 2.1. So, and those standards are really useful from the point of view of making sure that particularly learners who use assistive technology, not only, but that they are able to access that content, and that they have a good learner experience. What I found when I was doing those audits is that the thing that I kept coming across was actually, yes, in certain cases that they would be meeting those standards, but it still wasn't a great learner experience for people who had different types of access needs. So for example, just things that would not necessarily be, so I say one of the things that I kept coming across was that the web content accessibility guidelines have those AAA standards, which are kind of considered the real best practice standards. Now, lots of people absolutely understandably will be focusing, especially if they're looking at it as we just need to pass this this particular level, they will be looking at it as in, yes, I'm going to focus on the A and AA standards. What really, there are some AAA standards that I think people tend to overlook, and yet they're really good as a learner experience. So things like making sure that learners know within the learner journey where they are. That's one that kept coming up. So when I was doing auditing and working with people with disabilities, one of the things that they were saying, learners that had vision access needs, also a lot of cognitive access needs, they were saying, well, I don't know where I am in this. I don't know where my progress is. It's really important for me to understand, especially with some my screen reader tester who is blind, really needs a really clear understanding of the structure of what she's working with and where she is in that progress. So that was one of the things that kept coming up in our testing, is and yet that wasn't a violation of the standards. And then other things that came up were more kind of like not necessarily the WCAG AAA standards, but maybe more of the kind of usability side of things, and to be honest, just good instructional design. So things like very, very common plain language. Is the language more complex than it needs to be? Can we simplify this? Things like so heading structures, for example, it does get covered under the web content accessibility guidelines, but really it kind of is a technicality and says you need to describe exactly what it is, not as in actually the structure. How are you structured this? Have you got really relevant headings? Are you helping the learner? Are you chunking the the content so it's easy for them to learn? Things like we often have I was thinking of color contrast, but that one is the web content accessibility guidelines, so that one doesn't count. But things like as well, the debate that people have sometimes about instructions, whether you say click on something, and just using a more inclusive term, because people, for example, with motor access needs, not everybody is using a mouse to be clicking or their fingers to be tapping on something. So a term such as select, for example, that comes into me, the being considerate, making people feel that you're aware that people are not accessing things necessarily in the same way. And one that comes up a lot that really sticks in my head is imagery. So very often when I was looking at learning content, there would maybe be people with disabilities, visible disabilities. A lot of disabilities, of course, are hidden. You're not aware that people have disabilities, but from the point of view of trying to make people feel included, it was very often that it felt a little bit. There would be a kind of maybe just one image of someone with a disability. Very often someone who it would be a stock image, for example, that looked like someone had just chosen it because they needed, what I mean? It wasn't done with kind of deliberation and care that would maybe or show different types of access needs, like for example, someone who might have a hearing access need, or someone who could have a cognitive access need. So it's that kind of really challenging, I suppose, the way that we have. For me, it was certainly this is the way that I kind of always done it. I've always designed this because I think it works to absolutely changing my whole view of learning and really becoming a better learning designer and developer, because I was just seeing things from a different perspective and not always thinking about you know, as I say, this is, I think you very often tend to design for yourself, you know, what works for you. It's very difficult sometimes to kind of break that mold, and also that when you're kind of stuck in the doing the same thing because you think it works, I think that's where accessibility comes in. But I think again, the idea of for me is coming back to making someone always feel considered and welcomed, and you want everybody to have a good learner experience. So yeah, as I say, things like, you know, clear instructions, clear navigation. A lot of them, I think, sometimes on the people with cognitive access needs, that for me is a real benefit to everybody. But it's things like, you know, including accurate captions as well. You know, you not just having captions that are auto-generated that maybe don't have any punctuation in them, or, you know, if you're really trying to make people realize that you care about this, then you need to kind of, yeah, these are the types of things maybe to consider. Great.
We've got some hands up. Go ahead, Crystal.
So, no, Susie, you just brought up a really good point. So I was thinking the first example I was thinking of when you were reading this out and asking for specific examples, Osborne, was like for video content, for instance. If you have a text transcript, a descriptive text transcript, then you pass the criteria, right? You satisfy the WCAG conformance for video content. But if you had audio descriptions instead, I mean, which is the learner going to prefer, right? Are they going to prefer the descriptive text transcripts that are going to be read out by a screen reader, or are they going to prefer the audio descriptions that are immersed in it so they could have the full audio experience, right? So you have like this one level over here where your descriptive text transcripts is meeting the criterion, but then you have the experience over here of like going that extra mile to put in those audio descriptions. And then you mentioned captions too, Susie, and it has always blown my mind that craptions has conformance. And, you know, we call them craptions in our industry because, like, if you've ever been on YouTube and you've seen those craptions, like, they don't make sense, they totally are messed up, but they pass because they're there, right? There's nothing in the WCAG that says they have to be accurate captions, right? So that always blew my mind of like, why are we not failing this when this doesn't make any sense? It's like gibberish. But so again, yeah, having that experience in there of like proper captions, or, you know, going the extra mile with audio descriptions, I think really enhances that experience and goes above and beyond. Like the criterion's that baseline, right?
Yeah. So I think a couple of things that I think there may be something now in the understanding documentation for the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, which actually does focus a bit more on the accessibility side of things. So those are, and that's terrifying for me because they are updated all of the time. So I think there is more of an emphasis now on the fact that they should be accurate to be really meeting that criteria. But really interesting from the descriptive transcript, that as you were mentioning, and I absolutely agree with you that the having audio description, you can consider that as definitely going the extra mile because you have that experience. In a way, it's kind of trying to give someone as an equivalent experience as possible, and I think audio description does definitely do that. The interesting thing, and this is one of the things that I love so much about accessibility, is the you know, the longer that you're in it, the more you're working with it, you find out things all the time. So I worked with one particular screen reader tester who actually said that she preferred the audio transcript. She preferred for her the transcript because it meant she could use her screen reader at the speed that she's used to listening to content. Now, when you're working with a screen reader, you know, work with experienced screen readers, they listen to that content so quickly, and because she's so used to, and she finds it easier to process that content at that kind of speed that suits her. In actual fact, for her, she preferred it if there was a transcript rather than having the audio description. So it's really sometimes a question of, yeah, you just learn more. You just think, oh, you know, the assumptions that I may make and still make are sometimes, well, another person might find that more helpful. And also, with the transcripts, it again can be very useful for people with cognitive access needs as well. So, you know, again, as long as one of the things that we do see sometimes is we have seen inaccurate, obviously, captions, but we also sometimes see inaccurate transcripts, and they're very often sometimes generated by the system. So they can have no punctuation, and they can have, you know, the you know, timestamps in it that, and you kind of think, well, you know, if we can use AI to actually make a transcript, you know, to put punctuation in and to, then maybe the platform itself could also do that. So, and again, that comes back to me is doing something that makes someone actually feel considered and welcomed. If you've got a transcript, then, you know, and if you have captions, I mean, I know sometimes captions can be tricky because you might be using content that you don't have control over the captions. If that's the case with me, I still will try and, you know, do something that means that I add accurate captions. But, you know, sometimes people that I know that isn't possible. But if you do have control, then that's a real, I know that is a web content accessibility guideline, not coming back. That's more the kind of accessibility side under my definition, because that is a requirement. But it is, again, that, you know, it's almost like you were saying, Crystal, it's going that extra mile and showing that you really care. And you know, you might not always be able to, the tool might have limitations, you might not have always access to the content, but you're doing your best to make it as accessible as you possibly can.
Absolutely. Great. Osborne, did you have anything else for us before we move on?
There's a question from.
There's a question. Was there a second part of that question? Did you say?
There is, but Rita's put a question in the chat here that's been sitting there for a while.
No worries.
So maybe we want to touch on that first before I ask my second part.
No worries.
Great. Rita, did you want to jump in, or would you like me to read that from the chat for you?
Yeah, if that's okay, I can jump in. I was just wondering, when you were talking about the progress and for learners, that it's good that they know where they are in the course. And I just thought about one of my projects that I worked on, and actually accessibility was one of the important factors there. We had a progress bar there.
Okay.
And it was a storyline project, so progress bar on each slide. We had like hundreds of slides because it was a long course. And I was just wondering, I deactivated that. I have hidden that from accessibility tools, because I thought that progress bar might also distract learners if we have it in every slide. So I'm just wondering, what's your opinion on this very specific example?
Yeah, and that is a fantastic specific example, because that is exactly the type of things that we, as learning designers and developers, that we are having to make decisions on ourselves, because there isn't anything in the guidelines that says, you know, in this particular situation, if you're using this tool, then our guidance is this is what you should do. So many things that we have to do are based on a judgment call. And again, the decisions that you're making are very often based on what you think is best for your learners. And there will always be times when you're thinking, well, as you say, will this be something, even when it comes down to captions, when we were talking about before, sometimes people, you know, if you've got moving content on the screen, for example, some people can find it, you know, especially people with cognitive access needs might find you know, that moving content from the captions a bit distracting. So those are the types of things that we sometimes have to be, you know, making a judgment call on. If there's any possibility of at all, what I would always suggest you consider is giving people choice. So if that you could do something in Storyline, for example, use your universal triggers to allow someone to hide the, you know, to hide the progress bar if it was distracting. That would be something that I would consider, you know, if you can. Obviously, again, coming back to the actual logistics of creating learning content, that may not be, you know, an option for you to have the. Again, it depends how advanced you are as a Storyline, you know, a developer. You may that may be like using a I can't remember the word, but now it's not a trigger, is it? It's it's one of the. It'll come back to me a bit later. But yeah, yes, yeah. So that's quite often what we see. So for example, you can have you can I see in storyline courses where people will give you the ability to choose whether you have audio narration or not. So there's kind of a universal trigger that people can, or a toggle that people can switch. So if there's a dilemma and it's possible, I would always suggest giving people as much choice as you can within obviously the constraints that you're working in you know, in your reality of, you know, how long you've got to create content, etc.
Thank you very much. Great.
No problem.
And I think we had a follow-up from Nicole was asking about variable.
Variable is the word, yes. Thank you, Nicole.
Right. I think you can jump back in there.
Jump back in? Okay, great. So you mentioned one of the accessibility features when you're kind of writing your voiceover scripts for like video demonstration videos for learning content, let's say. And you mentioned that one of the key things is, of course, for some of our learners, not everybody may be using a mouse, right?
Yeah.
They may be tabbing through the learning content. Therefore, it's best to use words like select instead of using words like click, right?
Yes. Yes.
Now, I'm wondering, what's your thoughts in terms of the right clicks? Should we be using terminology now like right select, or should we be using terminology like double select, or should it be like how do you work around those?
Yeah, I would say if it's that's a good debate whenever you do say about the select. I think if you have a technical term which actually means something specific, then I think it's absolutely fine to use right click. And even when you're saying, you know, using select, this is something this is something that I especially do in audits, is we divide those audits into two sections. We'll divide them into specific, you know, web content accessibility guidelines, and then into that what we call kind of user experience and you know, learner experience. And we will always say this is a recommendation. So I've had people or worked with organizations who have not wanted to use select because they feel that select has a very specific usually they think, well, select is to choose between different options. So, you know, some people don't feel comfortable. Some organizations decide not to use select, and that is absolutely fine. And in your examples as well, I agree, you can get completely bogged down in shit. Oh, I mustn't be using this at all. If you think right click, people who have motor access needs, who will they completely understand obviously what we mean by click. It's just maybe like showing the fact that you know that you have considered that not everybody will select click. You have organizations who, you know, who disagree and still will still use click. That's, you know, it's, I think the main thing with all those kind of decisions about you know, what should we be doing in this situation, it is the one thing that I would say is, it's if you're working in a team or you're working with an organization, that's when it's really valuable to have had these conversations and decided as, you know, as a team, what's going to be how are we going to do this? How are we going to, is everybody confident about this? Does everybody know that this is the way that we do it? Because otherwise I think you can just get left feeling very isolated on your own, because these are the types of decisions that when we're trying to apply accessibility in a situation that isn't necessarily only from the web content accessibility guidelines, it can be quite tricky to kind of decide how you're going to apply them. That's when I think it can be really helpful if you decide, have these conversations and decide as a team or as a kind of, how are we going to do this? What's not necessarily a policy, but let's have some guidelines of actually what do we think? Are we going to use select, or are we going to use click, or, you know, and in the cases when it's right click, what are we going to do? And I would say again, yes, absolutely fine if it's a very, you know, it's a specific command, which is very much, you know, if you say right click, someone who's using assistive technology will immediately know what you mean by right click. They will probably be doing, you know, something slightly different, but they will know exactly what you mean by that.
Okay. And in your experience, I
Yeah.
mean, being in accessibility and working with stakeholders, various individuals that may not have as much accessibility knowledge as yourself,
Yeah.
and trying to communicate to them why it's important we use language like select,
Okay.
why it might be important to use bold font, not necessarily underlining text,
Okay.
right?
Yeah.
What are the best ways when you've kind of created learning material like this and it's being questioned by someone that doesn't have that background in accessibility? How do you go about making them understand the decisions that you made coming from your kind of accessibility background?
I think probably the best advice that I could give is to always center it back to a human experience. So a kind of, yes, obviously the guidelines and the standards are there because they are really helpful for us. I think if you're trying to explain why you've done something, if you link it back to a standard, absolutely great. But I think if you link it back to the experience that someone has, it's much more likely to have an impact. So one that I find useful, that I think I did use in the book, was making sure that your buttons, that's something that we find a lot in audits actually, is when you've got buttons that you have control over, that you put the label on. Sometimes you can have the accessible name not matching the visible name, the text on there. Now, what that will mean if someone has got someone who's using voice activation software, they could try and say the name of the button to activate it, but actually that won't work because underneath the assistive technology is trying to recognize it's a different name. It's been labeled differently. And for me, I think you can imagine someone being in that situation where they actually can't, that button won't function because the assistive tech, the accessible name is different to the visible name. That has much greater impact than if we just say, oh, we're not meeting, and I can't remember off the top of my head which one it is, but that you're not meeting this particular requirement. So if there's any way that you can oh, is that my network or?
Sorry, was that my typing? Was it too close to my microphone? Sorry, Susie.
Oh, no worries. I didn't know whether it was it. I could see everyone disappeared and then came back. So
No problems from my end.
oh,
Everything's fine.
perfect.
Yeah.
I'll carry on then. Yes.
Great.
So if there's any way that you can, if you can put it in that human context. So this is why I've made the decision. Yes, because this standard, but it's because someone who had this type of access need, who might be using this assistive technology, is going to face this barrier if we did it in a different way. I think that for me has always been the most effective way of kind of conveying those decisions. And again, we're kind of put in a position because also we have that extra learning context. So I always come back to making decisions based on what I think is best for the learner, really, as well. So coming back to that learning context as well.
Okay, great. Crystal, I think we got some more questions now in the chat there.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think Autumn, is your question covered? Are you good? You're good. Okay, awesome. Well, thank you, Osborne, for jumping in. We also had Caitlin join us.
Okay, great.
Which was our second guest collaborator for the book club this month. And so I did want to ask Caitlin to come on and introduce herself, share her key takeaway from your book, Susie, and I think she has some questions prepared for you as well.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah, sorry, it might get a little chaotic here in a second. I'm a teacher of the classroom still, and there's a bell about to ring and some movement about to happen, so my apologies. But I'm Caitlin Bartholomew. I'm still in the classroom, but I'm also doing some accessibility courses right now, working on some instructional design projects on the side. So this book super resonated with me, especially your framework for e-learning. It just makes so much more sense to have things in, and apologies if I'm repeating what other people have said. I know I missed the first half hour, but just having it laid out kind of in that order and categorized that way is so helpful. And I'm working on a storyline project right now, and I'm like, oh, let me go through. It's so nice to go through those steps. I wanted to ask you about the authoring tool accessibility guidelines and kind of the authoring tool provider responsibilities. It's something I've noticed too in not only some different authoring tools and what they use to showcase good projects are not always accessible learning experiences, and a lot of the templates with different authoring tools I'm finding are not, I'll test even the template before editing it and they're not, screen reader friendly or keyboard friendly. I didn't know if you just have any thoughts about kind of what you see, if there's, because I'm kind of newer in this, if you see like gradual improvements kind of happening. I know you kind of spoke to that a little bit, but if you have any more insight into kind of what you see on your end since you've been looking at this a lot more closely, longer than I have.
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and it's something that I think as a designer and a developer, what you would ideally, I suppose the first thing to say is that actually I think authoring tools have improved. So certainly since I started working, I remember working with a Storyline 2, I think many years ago, and actually having to manually make captions for, so the capability and the interest in accessibility has definitely increased. One of the things that I'm particularly happy about is that you see more authoring tools now having what we call an accessibility conformance report, which is based on that voluntary product accessibility template. And that's really helpful from the point of view of knowing upfront how accessible the tool is and how accessible the output is going to be. So for me, that's something, and that I think when I started, that was quite rare. So there is more of an interest in accessibility, and I think a lot of tools realize that it is a selling point, that it is something that actually benefits them, it benefits their business. I think there's still a very, very long way to go from the point of view of having an accessible tool that probably has all of the functionality that we would like it to have. There's sometimes a balance between maybe a more accessible tool might not necessarily. So for example, some of what I call the template driven tools have better accessibility sort of out of the box, but they might not necessarily have all of the functionality that you would like. And sometimes when you see updates to tools or you see new functionality being introduced and then the accessibility isn't there, that is such a shame for me, because it's that coming back to kind of thinking about accessibility. Clearly you've thought about it afterwards, so it's that kind of the blueberry muffin. It's not going to be, it's not actually really part and parcel of the tool. You've kind of thought about it and then thought, oh, well, actually we need to make this accessible. So that's disappointing. And I think again from the ATAG tool, what the ATAG guy, what they're suggesting is that making sure that the tools themselves are accessible for people with disabilities and access needs, and that's a real, in our industry we're nowhere near meeting that requirement, and for me that's such a shame, because I think we have an assumption in our industry that people with disabilities and access needs aren't designing and developing learning content, which is, it's just not true. It's just like we kind of think, oh, we're doing this for other people who have disabilities and access needs, but actually none of us have accessibilities, have disabilities and access needs. And then when you see, I've worked with people who, and I have, I'm dyslexic, and I work with people in my team who are testers who are neurodivergent. I work with people who have different types of access needs, all working in the learning and development industry. So it's that we're not different to anybody else. So the fact that the tools are still really, really poor on being accessible themselves is something that I think is a real shame in our industry. And again, it's that kind of, we're not just doing this as a tick box. We really passionately believe, or we believe in accessibility. We believe it's what makes things better, and that's why we want to do it. So that's for me why you should be not only focusing just on the output, but actually the tool itself.
Yeah, thank you for that insight. That's fantastic. I really appreciate what you're saying about that process and the growth and things moving in the right direction. And it reminded me of, I actually listened to the Equality Edit podcast it was a week ago or something that you were on, and hearing you talk about just how you were like, oh, should I, like, almost like, who am I to be like writing this book or do, and you were like, it just needs to be done. Like, it's just about taking that step and doing the thing and moving forward. And just hearing you talk about that was really inspiring too. And I think that's kind of the approach I try to take with other people. They're like, oh, there's so much what, and I'm like, just one step. But one question I'd love to know if you have kind of advice on this when, you know, people ask like, well, you know, how am I supposed to make it pretty? Like, if I have to meet all this color contrast, if I have to do this, like, and I have a lot of answers to that, but I feel like none of them are always like understood immediately. So I don't know if you have kind of a go-to response about being able to explain that, well, actually making it more accessible doesn't mean it can't also be pretty to people who are looking at it. You know, it just, and making it more accessible is going to make it better for everyone most times. So I don't know if you have any insight on kind of how to approach those conversations as well.
Yeah, so I think that, again, that's a really common issue that we face, I think, as accessibility advocates in learning and development. So I think, and I think it comes very much from the kind of myth around accessibility that it undermines the experience. And I think that's particularly true in learning and development, actually, because I think it comes from you know, previously we would have the all kind of singing, dancing, flashing, you know, learning, and then we would have the accessible text document, which was the accessible version. When I started, that was the way that we made any content accessible. We just provided a text version of that. So I think that's a very strong mindset that we still have. You know, that's that myth we still have it in our industry, that a lot of people think that accessibility will undermine the experience for everyone else, and that's really common, especially when you're talking about making things pretty. And, you know, sometimes when you have kind of the advanced functionality of some of the tools, and people get told, oh, well, you can't do that because that isn't accessible. So I understand that frustration. I understand, you know, some training I'm doing recently is people who are video editing, and they are, well, you know, this is this is the way we do. We have a lot of movement. We have, and it's kind of, there is a balance. You're absolutely right. There's a balance between making things, you know, it's like fully accessible. You can make something fully accessible, and it can be, you know, it can be a great learner experience. And for me, that example of thinking differently and being innovative is something that really drives excellent learning content. You know, when you're thinking about, you really have to put, you know, learners at the center of what you're doing. Absolutely, you know, and sometimes working within the constraints of an authoring tool and working within the constraints of the standards, very often, yes, it can sometimes be frustrating, but it really does make you think, you know, differently, and it makes you innovative. And so I think that for me is probably the coming back to excellence and innovation. How can you say that any of your content, well, for me as a learning designer, I can't say my content is, you know, excellent or good. If I am excluding anybody, I want everybody to have a good learner experience. So sometimes there is a bit of a, you know, you might not be able to do absolutely everything, but again, if you have the opportunity to provide people with alternatives, for me that is very legitimate. You know, some organizations will be very, absolutely not, we will not include anything unless it's 100% accessible. My approach is to have sometimes things that aren't fully accessible, but to provide alternatives, because for me that makes the learning richer and people can access it in different ways. So yeah, it's a great question.
Yeah, thank you so much for your insights. I really appreciate that.
Great. Thank you, Caitlin, for jumping in there. I wanted to encourage anyone who has any last minute questions for Susie. We've only got about 10 minutes left in our meeting today. But I had my own question for Susie. So I was very impressed with the ELA framework that you created. I didn't know that you had created it when I started reading about it in the book. I thought you were just like referencing it, and then I was like, oh wow, she created this framework. And so I was super impressed. I love the graphic too. Thank you for sharing that in the book club. And I actually went and found it on your website too. And I wanted to ask you about the framework and a little bit about your DALC program, to hear more about what you're doing there. And for folks who may be interested in going deeper and learning more from Susi, like what that looks like.
Yeah, so I think the framework again came about, and that was for me one of the kind of really the differences between writing the first and the second edition of the book. So the second edition of the book was after I'd had my assessment that said that I was dyslexic. So when I wrote the first book, I wasn't aware of that. When I wrote the second book, I was aware that I was dyslexic, and I think it was and it was interesting that you brought up the framework, because when I realized I was dyslexic, I kind of was thinking, well, and people were saying, oh, it's amazing that you've managed to write a book and yet you're dyslexic. So I was kind of thinking, oh, well, I managed to write the book, even I had all of these challenges around dyslexia, but I still managed to write the book. So that is, you know, an achievement. And then the more I looked into dyslexic thinking, it was, you know, having the ability. So dyslexic thinking, often, you know, different people will say that they have different kind of skills, whatever, but one of the key things is that you have the ability to break things down, complex you know, complex ideas, and break them down and simplify them. And I thought that is exactly what I did when I came up with that framework, because I could not process a great long list of those standards, and the core principles just didn't mean anything to me. It just did not help me to process anything. So I was so stuck by that I thought, well, actually, what will help me is to break it down and to group them. And not necessarily the grouping is going to be the, you know, depends what tool you're using, etc., what type of learning you're creating, but more or less whatever type of learning I'm doing, that's probably the kind of process that I will follow. And that's what really helped me to kind of anchor and set up the structure of the book. So it was the kind of thinking, I didn't kind of manage to write this book despite being dyslexic. I actually could not have written that book unless I was dyslexic. It was those dyslexic thinking skills that actually helped me to come up with the framework. So, and I have to say as well that I wrote the first book before AI. So it genuinely was all from my head. Whereas maybe with the second I may have had a little bit of help, I don't know, but yeah, it was, so that's something that yeah, I suppose I'm quite proud of the fact that actually it helped me, and I think it has helped a lot of other people as well, because it's just that contextual framework that makes it make sense. So that's the framework. I think when it comes to the program, after having written, I think it was after the first edition, I felt like it's all very well to say, you know, accessible learning is better learning for everyone, and it's, you know, you can do it, and, you know, you can make it as accessible as you possibly can. And I thought, actually, I have to prove this. There has to be some proof that actually this is the case. So really with the program I wanted to demonstrate that actually accessible learning can be excellent learning, and I wanted to kind of put into practice everything that I'd said in the book. So the book, as we were talking about, Crystal, is very much in some parts it's a reference. You can come back to it, and it will help you support. But actually, to make that come to life, that's why I put the program together, because there are so many things that actually, by following it, and it's a self-access program. So the idea with it is that, you know, it's practicing what it preaches. It's actually saying, and I deliberately used an authoring tool. I used the RISE authoring tool. Originally I was thinking I must find a completely accessible tool, otherwise, you know, I'm not doing this justice. And then I was thinking, actually, I want to use a tool that a lot of people use, because actually I want to prove that you can use a tool that isn't fully accessible, but you can still do things that make it as accessible as you can. So and showing people, you know, using an accessibility statement and showing the limitations of the tool, but still making it a good learner experience was what I wanted to demonstrate with the program. So that it really covers the the same content as the book, but it goes, as you say, into a lot more depth and gives examples. It also has lots of, that's the lovely thing when you're doing learning. You've just got that opportunity to kind of make it richer, and it has videos in it, has case studies in it of but real people going through those experiences. So yeah, it was such a wonderful thing to be able to do, was just to put it together and kind of also enrich it with a lot of examples from things that I had seen since writing the first edition of the book. So I suppose it's like everything that I know is in the program. So yeah.
That's great. Yeah, thank you so much. I dropped a link in the chat for anyone who's interested in checking that out. Bit of an Easter egg for the showcase and the free lessons. And we also have Nicole on the call today, and I didn't tell her I was going to call her out and invite her to give a little plug about her course, but I would love it, Nicole, if you would hop on. I know Caitlin, right, is currently in the course, and so I just wanted to give folks an opportunity who wanted to dive deeper and have some more hands-on learning about accessibility. I've heard such wonderful things about Nicole's course, and hopefully she's still listening on the call.
You're so sweet. Thank you so much. I'm in the course right now looking at assignments, so I'm doing both things, listening and giving feedback. Appreciate it. And Susie, your book is awesome. I have it on my bookshelf and I refer to it, and telling all the participants to get the book. So yeah, we have one more cohort. March 11th, we enroll in March 18th. It's a hands-on making online content accessible for all. And you audit and look at your own work. And if you have time, you remediate it, but you're really learning the criteria through a lens of reviewing and aligning to the criteria. So there's a link there. If you have any questions, just follow up. Thanks for asking. And you're all awesome. This has been great. Thank you.
Thanks, Nicole. Yeah, I probably should have warned her I was going to do that, but figured while she was here. So again, I want to thank Susie so much for joining us today. It's been wonderful getting to know you better. Thank you for giving us this wonderful book to the community. Osborne, thank you for being guest collaborator. Caitlin, thank you so much. I also want to invite you all to continue learning and reading with the Accessibility Book Club. Next month, we're going to be reading Accessible Communications. Create impact, avoid missteps, and build trust. And communications will cover platforms like social media, accessibility, and different online communication channels. So I would love to see you guys in the club. And if you have any feedback you want to share about this month's book, anyone is welcome to post in there and invite your friends along. So thank you guys so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I really
Thank you, everybody.
it.
Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. See you soon.